Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan McGuire, Manager of Professional Development at ACCE, and I'm happy to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar. This afternoon, we will have the final in our series highlighting our 2017 Chamber of the Year Award winners. We'll hear from Jason O'Rouke and Kelsey Moore of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, who will share how their chamber partnered with local chambers and associations across the state to understand more fully the policy and community issues important to the business community. Through live survey technology, demographic projections, data visualization, and good old-fashioned town halls, the Chamber changed the conversation about where policymakers should focus their attention to create and support a more vibrant state economy by 2030. So before I turn the program over to Jason and Kelsey, I have a few housekeeping notes. First, attendees are in listen-only mode during the webinar to avoid background noise. Second, after Jason and Kelsey's presentation, we will have time for questions, and you can ask those questions by using the question box on the webinar panel. That box is on the lower right-hand corner of your screen, so when you're ready to ask a question, just type it in, and Jason or Kelsey will read those and answer them after their presentation. If we run out of time and don't get to your question, or if you have a question that you would prefer to discuss with them individually offline, you'll be able to contact them directly. Their contact information will be included in the presentation on the last slide. If you ask a question and we don't get to it, we can also get in touch with you directly afterwards, after the webinar. And third, the webinar is being recorded, and it will be up on the ACC website on the ACC University webinar page by Monday or sooner. So I will tell you towards the end of the webinar how to get to that page, but it's on the ACC website webinar page. Also, the presentation slides that will be used today have been uploaded to the webinar panel on the right-hand side of your computer screen, along with a synopsis of the program that Jason and Kelsey will be describing, Georgia 2030. So both of those documents are on the webinar panel. Just click, it's under handouts, click on either of them to download them. If you're not able to download the documents for any reason, things aren't working, or you just don't want to do it during the webinar, that is not a problem. I will post both of them on the ACC website along with the webinar recording. So with that, I will introduce our speakers. Jason O'Rouke, the Georgia Chamber's Vice President of Public Policy and Federal Affairs, directs the Chamber's internal think tank, the Georgia Chamber Center for Competitiveness, and also handles federal affairs. Before joining the Chamber, Jason worked as a consultant on political campaigns of all sizes in Georgia and Alabama. He was the political director of the 2012 non-Metro Atlanta T-SPLOST referendum, as well as the campaign manager for the successful 2012 Georgia Charter Schools Constitutional Amendment. He previously served in the Washington, D.C. office of Congressman Doug Collins and began his career with the Council for Quality Growth. Jason serves on the alumni board of the University of Georgia School of Public and International Affairs and lives in the Kirkwood neighborhood of Atlanta with a beagle named Roger. Kelsey Moore is Economic Development and Special Project Director for the Georgia Chamber, and she's part of the Chamber's Economic Development team and serves as the primary contact for all local chambers in Georgia. Kelsey manages the Chamber's Federation Partnership Program, representing 121 local chamber and over 36,000 small businesses, and is also responsible for the Chamber's Small Business Initiatives and Investor Benefit Programs. So thank you, Jason and Kelsey, for presenting today, and I will now turn the program over to you.
Yep. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. You want to click the next one? Just to give you guys a little background about who we are, and make sure that you know we looked at this to make sure it is applicable both to state and local chambers as we're talking about both the strategic planning process and the partnership model. So we have been in operation for about 103 years with a staff of 33. We have an annual budget of a little over $7 million. We've just opened our second office in South Georgia in Tifton. We did that last year. And then to give a little background about how we're structured, we have about 3,000 chamber investors. And in that, we also have 146 federation chambers. Those federation chambers are local chamber partners, and any member of those chambers can be a member of the Georgia Chamber provided they have 10 or fewer employees. So that spreads our reach to about 47,000 businesses across Georgia, in addition to the 3,000 paying investors. And so that background is just a little bit important as we talk about how we leveraged that group going forward. So again, background, but in 2015, we celebrated our 100th anniversary. So we spent the year kind of talking about what we've done for the last 100, but we also realized that was a good impetus to figure out how we need to move forward and create a strategic plan for the next 100 years. So we needed a solution that was going to look beyond that 4-year political horizon, and one that focused enough to give communities and give our state and give our investors the time to fundamentally transform their strategic plans to implement this plan across the state. So like I mentioned, we've got 150 total chambers, 147 federation chambers, and that 47,000 members. So every year we do a statewide tour series. So that's the Georgia Chamber goes around to a chamber in all of our 12 regions of the state. We host a program, a lunch or a breakfast. We bring information. We talk to them about what's going on, whether it be political, whether it be what's happening from policy, legislative, or just what's happening in our state from an economic development perspective. So that program changes every year, but the key component of that is that we partner with a local chamber in each of those regions. So the event is put on duly by us and by that local chamber. We invite all of our members. We invite all the other local chamber presidents. And so that partnership and participation has been a key way that we have been able to get all the major players and stakeholders of these communities to this meeting. So do you want me to talk about how we did the 50 stops, or do you want to talk about that later?
Yeah, go do that.
Okay. So for this 2030 tour, which was our statewide tour that year, we had 22 local chamber events. So you may be able to see the dates on that. You can tell that we were on the road quite a bit. So we typically do 12, but we expanded it for 22 local chamber events this year. Combined with our 50 stops at college campuses, other polling groups, things like the Economic Developers Association, 100 Black Men meetings, the Hispanic Chamber, just kind of generally people that we don't typically talk to. We reached over 3,700 participants in this tour.
So part of the thing that we did when we were approaching this tour is that we didn't want to show up into communities where we maybe hadn't been in a while and say, hey, we're the big state chamber in town from Atlanta here to tell you everything you should be doing. So we started out at the beginning of, we have some good information. We're thinking 15 years ahead about what trends are happening around the state, but we also know that there's a lot going on in some of the smaller parts of the state where we don't get to go as often as we would like, and we'd like to hear about what's important to the people who are in these communities. So it was a two-way series of communication. We had data that we thought was worth sharing and could put it in a format that we felt like was new and different. And we also wanted to hear from our chamber federation and from the members of the companies who are in these areas, who may or may not be members of the Georgia Chamber, but their opinion was just as valid as anyone else's. So we wanted to hear about policy priorities. There were a lot of conversations about going into the 2016 election and into the 2018 election at the statewide level in Georgia, that we're gonna sort of change the future of the way the state looks. So we wanted to hear priorities from what these local businesses thought. We also knew that there were a lot of demographic changes happening around the state. So, like a lot of states and a lot of regions especially across the Sun Belt part of the U.S., we have major demographic shifts going on. A lot of counties are becoming majority non-white. political conversations are changing, and economics are changing. So we have agricultural communities across the state that at one time were thriving, robust economies, and in many cases now they're actually losing population and losing jobs. At the same time, we also had major metro areas, the Atlanta area, but also the other hub cities around the state in Savannah and Augusta and Columbus that were growing in different ways. And so we wanted to have the conversation about what that growth looks like, and starting the conversation about what some solutions are in the rural areas where they have the opposite effect. So as Kelsey mentioned, we had 22 different stops within these official local chamber meetings, but then we had around 50 or so total where we did the same tour and the same content, but went and spoke to just another group that we sort of viewed as non-traditional allies. A big part of this was to find groups who we agreed with on something, some policy area that we wanted to address, and we could use their help in growing the coalition. So that was sort of the overall approach to it. And again, we really wanted to emphasize that this was about hearing from our membership about what was important to them, because that was what would drive our agenda for the next 15 years. So we used some different tools and some different software that come out of sort of the policy side of things, and tried to present data in a way that people could understand it. So the slide I have up here for everybody is nothing, it's not rocket science, but it's projecting the job growth within the different parts of the state. And so we really wanted to show visually, on the map, what the state growth patterns look like, where the highest volume of growth is happening, and then where the loss is happening on the job side. And then we broke it out into the U.S. average, the Georgia average, and then the Metro Atlanta numbers, and then our hub communities numbers, and then our rural community numbers, to try to, in one sense, to say that the growth is different in different parts of the state, and also to show that we had thought about how each of these communities was a little bit unique. We also went into a lot of these communities, in addition to the statewide map, and showed on a regional level exactly where the growth was happening in their counties and in their neighboring counties, which ones were growing and which ones were not growing. So we made a point to make sure that we had localized data that they could look at and could understand. We had done some of this kind of stuff in the past, but we put a lot of thought into how you visualize these trends that are happening, because it doesn't make sense to walk in with a big chart of a big PowerPoint slide full of spreadsheets. Most people can't digest that data in that way. So we really thought about infographics and maps and things like that gave people a little bit easier way to understand what was going on. And so all of this is in the background while our CEO is talking to them about sort of the national trends and the statewide trends that are happening.
And like Jason mentioned, a big part of this was visualization. So those maps that you just saw about job growth were consistent across different things that we looked at that we hadn't necessarily talked about before: third grade reading levels, poverty rates, things like that. So you could start to see a trend and start to see how communities were, the maps were similar across different sorts of conditions.
So this is an example of an infographic that we used to project out what the jobs would look like, 10 years on the horizon. So we broke out their top growing industry sectors. And then we also talked about the piece on the left of this, the new jobs that would be created in their community, and then the replacement jobs that would be created in that would be available in their community in the next 10 years. This was a statistic that was very shocking to a lot of people who attended our meetings, was that the replacement jobs, which are the jobs that will become open as baby boomers retire, were almost always 2 to 3 or maybe more times more than the new jobs that were being created. So it really got people thinking about what their workforce development programs look like and how they fill the immediate need that's coming in the next 10 years. Not just thinking about education in a K-12 sense, but about a more workforce-focused sense. What do you do to solve this problem in the immediate future? Technical colleges, different models on how you train workers up. And then we also had data on the top growing industry sectors. So not only the number of jobs that were going to be created in these industry sectors, but also the percentage growth in those areas. Thinking about having these communities focus on the types of jobs that are going to be needed and how they could push their policymakers to make investments in there. So in a lot of the places where we've made these stops, agriculture has traditionally been the largest industry sector, and it never made the top growing industry sectors in terms of jobs. I think most people sort of know that, based on their own community, but making sure that they saw that agriculture wasn't even in the top 5 or usually the top 10 growing industry sectors in their areas got them thinking about, okay, what else could we be investing in at the K-12 level, at the higher ed level? How do we get this information to parents, to teachers, to counselors, and to students in thinking about where the jobs of the future will be?
And this is especially important for some of the regions in our state that their economic development groups are not getting those big projects. So it really did have them look a little bit more at workforce development as opposed to kind of chasing that big company.
So some of the tools that we use to create this was all done in-house by our staff, but recognizing that not everyone has a staff of in the 30s that have, or they have the ability to purchase the software licenses for things like this. I want to talk a little bit about what we used and how it could work for a large chamber or even a smaller chamber. So the data visualization was done with this kind of stuff. The slide you're looking at right now is just through Microsoft Office. It's Excel to make your charts, and then it's basically clip art from Office to make your infographics. And we just created things that were pretty simple and tried not to overwhelm the audience with too much data. Jobs EQ is a service that some of you may have used before, but it's a pretty standard economic development tool that projects out population growth, job growth by county level data, and it's got a lot of really cool tools that you can use. A Jobs EQ subscription is roughly $10,000 a year, depending on what you're using it for. So if you're someone who wants this type of data, it's worth looking into. There also are probably economic development entities within your communities who already have access to this type of data, and it's worth looking into to see if someone else has this or another tool, because there's some really cool projection information out there. You just need to be focused on how you want to use it and what you want to get out of using that data. For the map side, we ran it through a standard GIS program called ArcMap. Some of you, if you're on the economic development side, you've probably used it before. Again, we have the license in-house, and we do that ourselves. If you're a smaller chamber that doesn't have the staff side to do this, an engineering firm or an architecture firm or even your local government likely has access to GIS software and probably has someone on staff who is qualified to use it. And if someone who's qualified to use it is there, they can do this stuff pretty quickly. It's pretty amazing what you can do with the software in terms of making maps, visualizing trends, those kinds of things. So those are the two main systems that we use. It's all built around U.S. Census Bureau data and Bureau of Labor Statistics data, which are two big federal entities that are pretty boring. And if you try to go to their website and understand what it says, it's almost impossible. You really do need to, have a data person who can sort of think through what it means and then present it in a way that the average consumer, the average person who attends a chamber lunch can understand what you're talking about. It's really easy to get bogged down in trend lines and scatter plots and things like that. Putting too many colors on a map is another one that happens a lot of times. So we really, after we started putting this stuff together, we did a lot of in-house workshopping, trying to make sure that at least our staff understood what was happening. And if our staff felt good about understanding it, our non-policy staff, then we felt like the audience would usually be in a pretty good position to understand it.
Yeah, and just to stress what Jason said, Jason comes from a policy side, loves all this stuff, and can go so in depth. When he's talking about the non-policy people who need to understand it, that would be me. I'm a good example of that. So I can't stress enough, like he mentioned, reach out to your power companies, your state economic developers, your utilities, some of the counties and cities, they have this, and if you can say, you know, I want to see what sorts of industries these replacement jobs are going to be in this county, like if you can give them those kind of ideas of what you want to see and what you're interested in, they can pull that data for you, and they can pull it in a way that then you can translate it using Canva or whatever, you know, you'd like to do, but they can help break that down so you're not just looking at lines and lines of data.
Yeah, and I've genuinely been surprised at some of the people who have reached out to us after these presentations and asked for more information because they're using it to, you know, for future planning purposes. And it's entities like a regional technical college who I would have thought would have known this stuff.
Yeah.
And they're now using, for example, the healthcare data to think about what types of classes they offer, you know, 1 to 2 years from now, what types of instructors they're recruiting, thinking about this kinds of stuff. So I think the effect has been good. I'm glad they're using it now. And, you know, I kind of thought they would have already known that. And most of them probably do, but it's been good to hear that some of the places we went, a policymaker, whether they're an elected official or someone in higher ed or someone in K-12, has looked at this and rethought, okay, what are we doing? How are we adapting our programs for jobs of the future? So that's how we communicated data and trends to the audience. The second piece that we used on the other side of the communication strategy was learning about what they thought and what they cared about. So we used a tool called Poll Everywhere that's a live polling software. Some of you may have used this before, either in your own meetings or in meetings you've attended. There are other versions of this software out there, but this is the one that we settled on. And so the screen here shows you the two different views you would see if you use the Poll Everywhere software. So if you've been in the local chamber world and you go back 10 years, you probably bought some clickers from a hardware provider, and you know you could do live polling using the clickers and you're in the room. And then you probably lost some clickers and some batteries on the clickers died, and then your chamber got a little bit bigger and you didn't have enough clickers, so you had to share them. So this takes the clickers out of it. Everything on this software goes through a smartphone. So the left side of your screen is the screen on my phone when I'm logged into Poll Everywhere from the user side. The right side is what the screen looks like as the results come in. And so we use this to develop a 25-question survey that we asked our audience what they cared about. And so you can see the fun one that we have here to start with is what's the proper way to pronounce, I say pecan, because I'm from Metro Atlanta. But people from South Georgia pronounce this pecan. And so there is a disagreement on the proper way to do this. We use this one because it was a fun way to get people into the technology, lighten the mood a little bit, and get them familiar with what we're going to be doing. After we did this, we did a little demographic analysis, race, gender, age, to help local chambers understand who was actually in their audience. Again, they probably know it, but sometimes when the numbers come back that you are 92% white males over 65, it's a little bit shocking. So we helped them sort of understand the demographics of the meeting that we attended and to think about how do they diversify their membership. And then we also used it to ask about priorities. So we asked about transportation. You know, what's most important to you? Is it fixing potholes? Is it freight rail? Is it transit? Is it just fixing roads and bridges? We asked them about education. Is it higher ed? Is it technical college? Is it K-12? Is it pre-K? And so we got live feedback from the room. And again, our CEO was the one who presented this in most of these meetings. And it was a way to provide some nuance to the polling side. We had traditionally done this via online surveys, and our response rate was pretty low across our membership, and we really felt like our responses were not an accurate sample of the whole business community across the state. So this was a way that we were able to move and really get out into the field and talk to people that wouldn't have always responded to a Georgia Chamber survey. So again, the software works with any smartphone. If you have a laptop or an iPad or an Android tablet, it works there. one thing that we got that was really cool for this was Microsoft in-kinded about 30 little tablets that we could use during this tour, and it was a membership trade that they were willing to be part of. We gave them back at the end of the tour, but it was really nice for when we went into a place and maybe someone didn't have a smartphone or their eyesight wasn't great, but we could hand them a tablet and get responses from them. And then for anyone else who wasn't technology savvy or wasn't comfortable with technology, we had paper copies of the same survey that they could fill out as we went through them.
And then too, just to kind of add on to that, I know some of you may be kind of looking at this and thinking that your members are certainly not going to, be able to figure this out. It is a really intuitive software. They don't have to create an account. They simply enter a code, which we show on the screen, and as they vote, the kind of those bars move, which really did engage people, and it really did kind of reinforce the idea that their opinion was being listened to. So, they got really excited. Do you want to mention a little bit about what that cost?
Yeah, so it's a pretty cool, pretty easy, approachable software. So it's free to try it out. If you have fewer than 25 people responding at any one time, it's free to use. It becomes a subscription-based program after that. So as you add, as your audience gets bigger, you pay more. You can pay monthly or you can pay annually. I actually joke with Kelsey that I should get a commission on this because so many of our local chambers after these tours ended up using this for their meetings, and they haven't written me a check yet, so I'm assuming that I'm not on retainer with them. But I really do like it, and I really do enjoy using this as a way to get immediate feedback. It is, again, like the data side, you've got to be thoughtful in not throwing too much information at your audience. It takes time to write a short question with short answers, and you can try to ask too much and it can become confusing. So it's really good for getting demographic feedback, and also for having the members and the people in the audience tell you what is most important to them or how they feel about a subject area.
Yeah, and there are different types of questions. There's ranking, there's some different ones, and you can see that in what Susan sent out. It's got a little link to a past presentation that has all the questions. So you can see Jason spent a lot of time kind of figuring out what the best mix of ranking versus choices, what that kind of mix looked like and how long a question should be. So you can all see examples of both the questions and the answers if you look through the synopsis document.
And one point on the questions that I think is worth mentioning, in addition to some of the policy priorities and some of the demographic sides that we talked about, we were intentional about asking some questions that were not traditional Chamber of Commerce type questions. And so when you look through them, you might see what some of those are. And so keep in mind when we were doing this was in the early summer of 2015, and so 2015 and 2016. So at that time, that was right around the time that some of the things are going on in Ferguson, Missouri, other parts of the country where race was coming up and racial issues were coming up in the public setting. And in many cases, chambers were being asked to weigh in and to make statements about these policy areas. So we asked some questions that I think most people in the audience probably had never been asked before, especially at a chamber meeting, about what do you see, how do you see race impacting your community? What is the best way to increase economic mobility? Asking about poverty, asking about should the chamber be leading on these issues of race, or should the chamber let somebody else lead but have an active role? So there were some things that came out of that, and I think it got people thinking. And then what that was able to do was that over the next couple of years, we were able to do a little bit more in sort of changing our internal structures, and also because we were willing to ask those questions publicly and talk about it publicly, it opened the door to some non-traditional partners who maybe hadn't felt as welcome at the chamber, because we had never sort of gone to them and said, hey, this is something that we're interested in.
And I get too that those asking, directly about race and poverty and education levels, and honestly, we got down to the healthcare piece of the weight, seems scary. And I completely understand that. You know, you've got paying investors in the room. You know, you don't want to, that seems like a scary position to take. But really, I think the important part that came out of that was that gave our chamber and could give your chamber a way to connect both your nonprofit members, your business leader members, to kind of help you create groups that will help you craft a response and craft programs and craft committees so that you are addressing these issues, which are important to the business community. You know, it's a lot of them are addressing our future workforce. So it does kind of help put it puts data in between your chamber and in this sensitive issue.
And I think one thing to think about as we talk about the responses to this is that we went into this knowing that this information is going to be useful. It may not change everything that we're already working on, and it may not, you know, some of the answers may not be what we hope they will be. And that's sort of something to think about going into it, is that, you know, you may, as a chamber employee or chamber leadership person, think that your membership feels one way. And then when you actually ask the audience these questions, the responses come back and they don't look like what you were hoping they would be. And that's okay. And that's good for you to know. We also sort of use this as a way to prioritize what we're going to be working on, but also to think about things that maybe our leadership felt strongly about, but our broader membership hadn't really thought through. And this was a way to say, you know what, there's some education that needs to happen here about different issue areas, or maybe about these types of things like race and gender, other things that we had sort of shied away from in the past. So it was pretty cool. We got a lot of good data out of it. Like Kelsey said, over 3,500, 3,700 total unique responses. So what it was able to do was help us put together a good amount of information that we could then take back at the staff and to our higher levels of leadership and say, all right, these are the priorities of our general membership. These are what people who attend Chamber of Commerce breakfasts and lunches think. And that should formulate a lot of what the chamber should be doing. So some lessons learned that we sort of made some mistakes on that hopefully you could avoid. So making data interesting to a broad audience is challenging. The room is always a mix of people who know specific things about one individual question or one individual data point, and they want to get in the weeds. And then you also have people who are coming at this totally from having seen Bureau of Labor Statistics data before and not even knowing what that is. So you have to be really thoughtful about how you make that interesting. Keeping the colors simple on the map is important. So 3 to 5 colors, keep them consistent. You don't want your maps to look like modern art with 27 different versions from Roy G. Biv. Don't overload the audience with data. So make 1 to 2 key points per slide, and the presenter is there to spell it out. So even though the graph might say obviously what it says, the person presenting is there to explain why the bar chart going upward is a bad trend, or why the scatter plot that you're using, what it actually means.
And it was really, I think, we found a lot of success in that with our presenter, who's our CEO, but obviously our team too, did a lot of research and has a lot of understanding of the area, because throwing in kind of colorful anecdotes, but also knowing kind of what makes up that community, whether that be that the chairman of the board of that chamber is an insurance guy, or whether it's knowing that there's, a fun rivalry, whatever it is, like that was really important to making sure that we had a two-way conversation, and that these questions were, I guess, taken in the spirit in which we were asking them.
Yeah, and that relates to the final point I was going to make on data is connect data to stories. The context is critical, and human stories are always best. So one thing that our boss, Chris, does a really good job of is, like Kelsey said, knowing the history of a community before you get there, feeling comfortable talking to the people who are in the audience and talking to them about what they care about. So anytime you can connect data on the uninsured rate to the hospital administrator who's in the room with you, and let him know that you understand that he or she has these challenges, and that they're just trying to do their best to keep their citizens healthy, it's always a better way to make the connection. On the survey side, 25 questions or so is about the limit. People start to get bored and the answers start to fall off. Like Kelsey said, we had some that were ranking questions. Those can be helpful, but they're a little more difficult and take a little longer to do, so it slows things down. Again, writing short, thoughtful questions takes practice, and we usually went through probably 3 or 4 versions of a question, cutting off different questions, deciding that something maybe wasn't as important as we thought it was, or, we did 2 or 3 stops and we kept getting the same answer with 92% results every time. And so we decided, this is unanimous. We don't need to waste time asking this question. And then, like I said earlier, be prepared for a few answers that maybe disappoint or even anger you. There were a couple places we went that, my gut reaction was that they had some pretty backwards views about a lot of the topics that we were talking about. And, we wanted to ask them seriously how they felt about things, and the answers that popped up on the screen were a little bit disappointing or angering. But that was good for us to learn from. It was good for us to understand that there was a different viewpoint out there, and that, if we feel strongly about these issues, then we need to communicate that better.
And to Jason's point, too, the demographic info, and again, this is all kind of aggregated on the back of the PoliB things, and you can compare them and such, but knowing, too, the people who were answering these questions and where they were located and their age, also helped us get an understanding of, if we are going to tackle certain issues or, policy perspectives, here is the group that we need to get buy-in from, because we don't currently have it.
Yeah. And then I think one of the things that we really thought about this is that if you got those answers or you saw that the results weren't what you were hoping for, it doesn't mean that you're doing the wrong thing. It doesn't mean that you're focusing on the wrong issues. It might just mean that you're ahead of the trends, and that, as chambers often do, are leading on issues, and then our membership looks to us for what their priorities should look like, and maybe things that they should be doing. So again, that two-way communication, understanding that, what your role is in this, and that you're there to respond to your membership on many issues, but you're also there to help them along the way on things that maybe they haven't thought about up to that point. So, final sort of side of things, what came out of this, some internal and some external results. So most of our core chamber principles were reinforced by data. The things we were doing on transportation, the things we were doing on healthcare, the things we were doing on tax policy. We felt like we were going in the right direction, and we had data from our membership to validate that. It strengthened our resolve on many core issues. But we also found some identified areas that needed increased attention from us. So if all of you work in the chamber space on this, soft skills, employability skills, we had been talking about those for several years, but I was genuinely shocked at how off the charts that was in terms of what people thought was important compared to some of our other traditional education priorities. It also resulted in some new internal and external priorities for the chamber, some new committees and councils. So we had strong feedback that the chamber needed to lead on issues of racial conflict, and that a lack of diversity in many communities was a problem. So this led to us starting our Diversity and Inclusion Council, which is a really unique group full of people who, had never stepped foot into our office until they were invited to this meeting for the first time. And now we have a sounding board, and we don't always agree on everything, but they're there to help us and our members understand different perspectives on diversity, and also when it's appropriate for us to go through and say, hey, we don't know the answer to a certain question. So, for example, like many states in the South and not in the South, we've been dealing with the last couple of years about how to address Confederate monuments. And so we did not have a policy statement on Confederate monuments because that had never been something that we thought was something that we would weigh in on. Increasingly, we are asked to weigh in on that. So we were able to use the Diversity and Inclusion Council to craft a policy statement with a lot of different buy-in and a lot of thoughtful people in the room to say, you know what, this is how the chamber should address this. And they were able to recommend some language. We were able to work it through our normal processes and say, okay, this is now our position on Confederate monuments. And it ended up in a place that satisfied a lot of people, and it was a helpful process along the way. And then the last thing that sort of led to was the development of our 8 for 18 priorities. So the major themes that came out of this, around workforce, around rebuilding the rural parts of the state, around business climate and legal climate, we packaged those into 8 for 18, and that's a website and a series of videos and a series of recommendations that we delivered to every candidate for lieutenant governor and governor in the state who was going to be on the ballot in 2018. We sent them what our priorities looked like, and then we asked them for their responses and how they would address these issues. And so we had found that there were many candidates who wanted to claim the mantra of the quote business from the business candidate, and oftentimes that candidate was not aligned with even half of our views. So in order to reclaim the mantle of who decides what the business community likes, we felt like we were in the best position to make that claim. And so we developed this platform, and it has become the pro-business platform for 2018. And so we were able to get responses from all the major candidates, Republicans and Democrats, and we gave them a chance to say, okay, here's what we believe, and here's why. Now we want to know what your thoughts are on these issues. And they weren't gotcha questions. They weren't, ways for us to come back and say, well, you said you would support tax reform. Why aren't you now? We put it out there as here's what we think is pro-business. Now we want your opinions on how you will address diversity and inclusion, or how you will address changing the legal climate in the state. And that information is all now public for our members to look at. So candidates are on the record, but they're able to be on the record in their words, but talking about the priorities that we presented.
Yeah, and so if your chamber, and I know there's a lot of chambers out there that either don't get involved politically at all, or just very, very hesitant about it. Again, this is a great way to develop a set of questions that you can use for candidate forums. You can use for if you do, weekly op-ed in your newspaper. Your members are asking you which candidate to choose. Your members are asking you what you think about the candidates. So this allows you to put them a set of questions that they're not leading. They are what your business community, what your members wanted to hear about. Again, you're kind of putting that data in between you and any potential issues. So this could be a great way for you to create that sort of thing if you're coming into kind of a major election season.
Yeah, so it's real nice for a candidate who comes to the chamber and says, okay, I want to be the pro-business candidate. Here's what I'm hearing, and they say, I've heard over and over again, X policy position. We're able to say, well, we went around and asked 3,500 business people that same question, and we got a very different result. Are you sure you're talking to the right people, or are you hearing from 2 or 3 people and you're just taking that position? That's a pretty powerful tool to have in your pocket. So this is my closing slide here. You've got Kelsey's information. You've got my information on this for contact. I also put up here the data sources that we used, the software that we used for this, and then the 2 microsites that we developed out of this. So the 2030 portion of our website, and then also the 8 for 18 website, either of which you can visit, and you can sort of see how we visualized this information, how we talked about it, and sort of what we're doing with it going forward.
Yeah, and in that linked document too, there's additional information on top of this, but there's also something that might be helpful. It's kind of a one-pager from Poll Everywhere that they did, and Jason wasn't kidding. He really should have negotiated some sort of referral fee because they ended up writing a white paper on him and how we use this software, but it gives kind of a nice, concise example on how your chamber could use it as well. So with that, we will just turn it over to questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to just type them into the question section of your GoToWebinar screen. It's that gray drop down, usually on the right-hand side. Yeah. If there are any, show up there. And we'll give you a minute or
Thanks.
two.
Yeah, thanks, Jason and Kelsey. That was a really interesting presentation, and the data on pecan was really interesting.
I kind of wish we could do it live for this group.
That would be interesting. Oh, looks like we do have a question, so go ahead, Kelsey. Looks like we have one here.
Okay. Yeah. Put there so you get the little doubler and spread it out, and then spread it down. Okay. So would it be possible to get a listing of the questions you asked audiences using Poll Anywhere? Yes. The list of questions is all on that. I believe it's a PDF that Susan sent out. So in the bottom of each page, you'll see some little gold squares, and those were all of our supporting documents for this synopsis. And so one of the things that is contained within that are all the questions.
And the results, actually, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
So that the synopsis is loaded onto the webinar panel, and again, I will post it again with the recording. So you should be able to get it there as well. Any other questions? There we go. Oh, those little gold boxes.
The little gold boxes are not working. Okay, thanks, Blake. We'll check that and make sure we get Susan a copy where the gold boxes are working.
Yeah, thank you for checking that out. Okay. Well, while we're waiting to see if there's any other questions, I'll just remind everyone that where I will post the recording of this webinar. So hopefully by tomorrow, if not tomorrow, Monday, I will post the webinar on our ACC webinar page. So you go to www.acce.org. You click on professional development, hover over ACC University Online, and then click on webinars. So it will be there. All our webinars are listed in sort of reverse chronological order. You click on the little thumbnail and you will see the recording, you hear the recording, and all the presentation slides and any other links that are of interest will be right there as well. Okay, any more questions? That looks like it may be it. You guys have it, Jason, Kelsey, have any closing words or anything else you wanted to mention before we end?
No, this is, if anybody is interested in this, I'm happy to sort of spend a half hour, an hour sort of talking you through some of the mechanics of it. I've done that with many of our members here. It's not hard to use the Poll Everywhere software or to use the GIS software, but you do need to think about it well ahead before you decide you're going to do it. You know, I worked with somebody a couple weeks ago who was trying to start from scratch 1 week before a meeting, and that's not enough time to really think about your questions and to get familiar with the software. You know, think about how you want to use the data and then build it from there. And we're happy to sort of answer any questions along the way and help you if you want to just work through it.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. This was great information. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for participating today. Our next webinar, ACC University webinar, is going to be on Tuesday, the 29th of May, on the subject of membership statistics and benchmarking. We'll focus on benchmarking best practices for fiscal year 2017 and how to use ACCE's benchmarking program, dynamic chamber benchmarking, and how to use the resulting trend reports to measure membership retention. So if you are interested in membership retention or statistics, that's a good webinar to sign up for. You can register for it on our events page, just like you registered for this webinar. So thank you again, Jason and Kelsey, for taking the time to present today, and to everyone for your participation and your interest. I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and we will see you at our next webinar. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.